Today we're going to talk about how to set up 3D views for exporting into BIM 360 Glue. The way we're going to do that is really by using worksets and scope boxes to create the 3D views. And the reason we want to do that is to really make it easy for us to control the visibility of what's going out when we export to Glue, and also to make it really easy to manage down the road when we need to make new views. So as you can see here on the screen, I have all the buildings turned on in my visibility graphics, but each building is broken down by work sets. So you can see building 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all have different work sets. That's why they're different colors. The garage is also on its own individual work set. So that's kind of how we want to set the project up. It's really going to make it a lot easier for us to manage and control the visibility of what's going to get exported. So the next thing we want to do after we create the work sets and put the correct buildings on the correct work sets is to go ahead and start creating our scope boxes for exporting to Glue. So as you can see here on the screen, this is an example of one of the exports. This is going to be the building 1 and leasing area, and you can see that those correct work sets are turned on. We've got the garage here in green, the red is the building 1, and then you can see my scope box is capturing that, and it's going all the way from the lowest extent of the garage all the way up to the very top portion of the roof. And the way you do that is just, let's go to the floor plan of that. So here you can see that was the scope box right there I've selected in 3D, but you can see I created a scope box for each one of these buildings. So there's building 3 scope box, building 5, building 4, and here's 2. Here's an example of where a scope box is going to overlap a portion of building 1, for instance, and that's because you can see this building is angled off, so it's going to overlap a portion of building 1 in order to get all of building 2. So that's kind of the reason why we want to create the work sets in the first place, is because when I make this a 3D view, I don't want to see the building 1, all I want to see is building 2, and that's why the work sets are important, because I can easily control what's visible in that 3D view by just turning off that work set and just showing the building 2 work set and the garage work set. Another good reason why you want to utilize scope boxes is really we're trying to create just small chunks, basically, or sections of the model for Glue, and that's to really optimize the performance of Glue. Because if I was to try to turn on all the buildings, let's say I showed all these buildings on right here, and I try to load that into the iPad, it's really going to be sluggish. It's not going to really work very well. It's going to be very hard to see and turn on things. It's really just not feasible. So that's why we need to break it up in chunks. It allows the iPad to process the information much quicker and spin around in the model. It'll just be a lot easier for the users to manage in the field if they're broken up that way. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you an example of how to create the scope boxes. Like I said before, we're going to do one for each building, and you obviously want to make sure you're going to include the lowest extent, like I said, of the garage, and then you want to go to the highest extent of the building. So let's just show one example. To create the scope box, you go to the View tab, and then here's the scope box. You want to name it to the correct name. So let's just name this one Building 1 and Leasing. We want to set the height to, let's say, 60 feet. I know the max height of this building is about 55, so that should be good. And then you want to just kind of find the extent of what you want to surround, and just go a little bit beyond that. So that's how that one would be created for building 1. Then you're going to go to the 3D view of that, and then drag the scope box extents down to the lowest portion of that garage, and then it should automatically by default be at 60 feet from the ground level, because that's the floor plan I created it. So it's going to basically create the scope box based on what level you created it in. So because I was in level 1, it's going to start from level 1 and go all the way up 60 feet to the max building height, and that's why I need it. In 3D I would drag that view down to the lowest extent of the garage. That's the way you can see here, this one, because it's a test, I need to drag this one down. So that's how I set up those scope boxes for each building. So once we're finished creating all the scope boxes for each building, we're going to go ahead and start creating our 3D views and get them ready for exporting to Glue. So let's go ahead and look at an example of how we would do that. Right now you can see on my project browser I have set up the 3D views already. You can see that they're named accordingly to the building number. Building 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I also have one called Arch All Buildings, and that's because I want to create a view with all the buildings turned on. And that's really going to be for when we need to do BIM coordination. I want to have all those buildings on, whereas these individual ones, those are primarily going to be used by consultants or the contractors when they're using their iPads in the field to make it really easy for them to load those files. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you one example of how we would create the 3D views. You can kind of see right now here in my 3D views, I have them set up by type. So I have, these are all going to be for exporting to Glue. I also have coordination views and working views. When you're working on a big project, you're going to have several team members, so it's really going to be helpful to organize your views by using what's called primary or secondary views, and that's what I did right here. And the way you set those up, it's really easy. You just go right click on your views tab, hit browser organization, edit, and under the grouping and sorting tab you can kind of like tell Revit how you want to set up your project browser. So the first thing we want is discipline. That's going to be architectural, structural, mechanical, things like that. The next one is by view type. So that's going to be plan, elevation, sections, 3D views. And then the last thing we want to do is set up the hierarchy of our project or browsers by the primary view. So just click on that, hit OK, and that you'll find that you'll be able to find the primary and secondary view under your properties dialog box right here. You can see here's primary. I currently have this level 1 view set to coordination, so you can see there it is. So you can see here off to the left in my project browser the 3D views I have set up. Under primary views I have BIM 360 Glue. Those are going to be on my building exports for Glue. Then I also have coordination views. Those are, the project team can use those for when they link in, let's say, a consultant's file. That's really what those coordination views would be for. And then you got your working views. Those are going to be any of the team members' working views that they need for production purposes or for printing, things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and show you an example of how to create the 3D view, let's say from start to finish. Here in this floor plan I already have the scope boxes turned on, and I like to do it from the floor plan, it's just easier. But really all you're going to do, let's say if I wanted to do this scope box right here for building 1 in the leasing, is just select it. Make sure you already have a 3D view you want to apply it to. So I already made one, and it's going to be, let's say it's in my working views. I want to apply it to that. Just go ahead and name it correctly. So you have the discipline underscore building 1. I called it test. So go ahead and go to your floor plan, select that scope box, and then under your views tab, actually I'm sorry, not under views but under add-ins, is auto section box coins, and you can download that for free. Just Google coin section box and you should be able to find that and download that really easy. It's a great plugin for creating the 3D views of what you want to crop it to, and we're going to crop it to the scope box, so that's another reason why we want to set up those scope boxes. So click on auto section box and it'll pull up a dialog box asking you, what 3D view you want to apply that section box to. So let's go ahead and find our test. There it is. The size is This is kind of showing you, it's an option basically to allow you to, if you wanted to offset the scope or the section box from what you selected, you could modify that as well. Let's just keep it at 0. And this, hit OK, and it should apply it to that view right here. So there it is, and you could see it cropped exactly what I wanted it to. This is where you want to also make sure under your visibility graphics you have the correct information turned on. So make sure all your 3D information that you want turned on in that view is on. I usually have that hidden. Import, you don't want anything on, like that's gonna be like a DWG, and then the worksets, should show the correct worksets. So this is building 1. You could hide building 2 through 5. In this case, I didn't really need to because I don't have any problems with the visibility of building 2 showing up. But that's where you want to control that visibility, is under your visibility graphics. An example of where you would actually want the correct worksets turned on, and the other views or the other buildings turned off would be, for instance, this building right here we talked about earlier, like building 2. So let's go ahead and look at that in 3D view and show you how to control the visibility of the worksets. So that way we don't see, the overlap of building number 1 and a portion of building 4, as you can see right there. So let's click on building 2. Right now you can see that those buildings are on in this view. So let's go ahead and show you how those are turned off, and that's why we established the work set. So under visibility graphics, you just click on worksets, and you'll see building number 1 right here is visible. Let's go ahead and just make that hidden, and hit OK. I want the garage on, and I obviously want building 2 on. The other ones could remain hidden. So that should go ahead and just turn off building 1, and that way we can just see what we want. We want the garage, and we want building number 2. And then let's go back to our test right here. So it's in our working view. So that looks good. We have everything we want turned on in that view. So once that's ready, you can go ahead and put that on the correct primary view. And like I said before, to do that you want to go in your properties palette, and under primary view, let's switch that from working to our BIM 360 glue primary view, and you can see it just put it right in there. So that's how you want to set up your views, make it really easy to find and organized for exporting to glue. So the last thing we want to do before we export our 3D views to glue is to do one final check on the name of the view and also on the visibility graphics. So when we name the files, we want to be consistent with our naming, and we kind of want to set up a standard way of naming it, because when we export to glue, the next time we make changes and want to export again, we want to really just overwrite that same existing file. And if you have a different name, it's going to create another file. We don't want that. We just want to overwrite the existing one each time it's exported. So the way we have it set up is by discipline name underscore and then the corresponding building number that we want to export. So in this case it's the architectural model. So we have arch underscore building 1 and the leasing. And that's basically how we're going to name it. We're going to do it for each building. And then we also have one set up for all the buildings for BIM coordination. And that one's set up like that. So for the visibility graphics, just go ahead and bring up your visibility graphics dialog box and just make sure the correct categories are turned on. And also you don't want to show any CAD files, so make sure under your imported categories those are all off. And then make sure your work sets are correctly on or off, just depending on what building you're trying to show. And then one last thing is to make sure that there's nothing floating around in space. Like we don't want any 2D or 3D lines. We don't want any CAD blocks, things like that, floating around. So just make sure those are hidden before you export to glue.